So here's our final video on macromolecules, still in Unit 1, where we'll be talking lastly about nucleic acids. Nucleic acids that we're familiar with are DNA and RNA. Of course, those are the names of the polymers. The monomer of a nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. Nucleotides are these pieces here that are made up of 3 structures. All nucleotides look like this. They all have a phosphate group, which is this PO4 molecule that we talked about with the functional groups. There is this pentose sugar. It's a 5-carbon sugar is what that means. It could either be deoxyribose or ribose, depending on if it's DNA or RNA, respectively. And then, of course, you have your nitrogenous base. And nitrogenous base can be one of 5 different bases. The 5 bases that we have are found here. They're grouped into 2 groups called pyrimidines or purines. The pyrimidines have a single carbon ring, as you can see, a single carbon ring versus a double here. And the pyrimidines are cytosine, thymine, and uracil. Note on uracil it is only found in RNA and it replaces thymine. And then the purines are adenine and guanine. One way that I remember the pyrimidines is they all have a Y in them, except of course uracil, which I guess if you were creative you could kind of imagine that being a Y, if that helps. And then the purines, of course, adenine and guanine, and these bases form pairs with each other. T always joining with A, C always joining with G, of course in DNA, but in RNA that T is not there, so the A will then join with U. Okay, so the A will join with U. That was a miss. So, what are the functions of these molecules? Ultimately, nucleic acids store information, hereditary information about the color of your eyes and how tall you're going to be and that sort of thing. They do have individually different functions. DNA is kind of like the master blueprint. It is the structure that is, there's one copy per cell. It sits in the nucleus, and it is the only copy that you have of that DNA. The RNA is usually a disposable copy. So in the back of my classroom, I'm looking right now at a fire escape plan, and on that fire escape plan is a blueprint of our building. If that were the only copy of the blueprint in existence, that would be a very expensive way to display a fire escape plan. No, it's a copy. Every teacher has one. It's disposable. I could get another with no problem. And so RNA serves as that disposable copy in order to go and give a temporary message or hold some sort of information temporarily. Here's a picture of the DNA molecule, a little more zoomed out here. DNA is a double helix or double stranded. You can see the 2 strands here. There's 1 strand, 2 strand. The 2 strands are joined together with each other. Let me zoom in a little bit. So here's an individual macro or an individual nucleotide. Here's another individual nucleotide. These 2 nucleotides, just like the other ones, just like the monomers that we've talked about in the past, are joined together with dehydration synthesis. And the bond that joins them together is called a phospho, because it's phosphate diester bond, phosphodiester bond. And that's a strong bond, and it keeps these rails of the DNA very strong. But notice what's going on in the center. The 2 sides are connected with hydrogen bonds. hydrogen bonds don't take a lot of energy to break, and they don't take a lot of energy to put back together. And so this is a great bond for the DNA molecule because DNA is constantly needing to be separated and joined back together. A couple more things about DNA. These two guys here were credited with discovering the structure of DNA. In 1953, they were the first to build this model of DNA showing the two complementary sides, the A's, T's, C's, and G's. And they used the work of many other scientists that kind of led up to that discovery with that. And up until this time, DNA was considered kind of they didn't really know what was going on with it. And this has really kind of paved the way for a lot of discoveries, evolutionary biology and so forth, genetics that have, we understand, of course, DNA to be vitally important in our own bodies now. And speaking of evolutionary biology, this shows you, this is a we talked in the last video about hemoglobin. Well, this shows the difference in amino acid chains. What do amino acids have to do with DNA? Well, the DNA codes for those amino acids which make up proteins. And so it's important to make sure you understand that DNA ultimately codes for proteins. And those proteins do the things in our body. So this is what separates us from other organisms. This is what makes us different. We're not chickens, we're people, because we don't have the DNA that says go make feathers. And so, among other things. And so that DNA tells us who we are. And you can see here the differences between the different organisms. Well, we're a lot more different than from a frog than we are from a gorilla. And so this shows you that how DNA can show evolutionary relationships. And so we talked about the nitrogen cycle in the last video. We'll look at the phosphorus cycle in this video because, of course, phosphorus is required to make DNA because of those phosphate groups. Phosphorus is initially a component of a rock, some mountain somewhere. The rock breaks up over time through a process called weathering. Phosphorus is then released into the soil, dissolves into the soil through rain and precipitation, makes its way into these bodies of water and so forth, and then plants can take them up, little organisms can take them up, and then those organisms are eaten by things. We eat those plants and we eat the things that eat plants, and so therefore we get that phosphorus in our own systems. Decomposition, of course, puts this phosphorus back into the soil, and so in this way phosphorus is never really returning to the rock, so to speak, but it is returning back to the soil and through that process of decomposition.